So I want to move to introduce Nataka Moore. And again, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. I know some of you have put some in the chat, but please put it in the Q&A so that Nataka can have the speakers address them. Nataka Moore is a member of the steering committee of US Women and Cuba collaboration. She is also an accomplished professional in Chicago with a doctorate in psychology and serves on the core faculty for the Doctor of Psychology and Clinical Psychology program at Adler University. She has dedicated her life to diversity and inclusion and social justice and has integrated that into her professional life and community work. The talk is currently working on a webinar for us on building Black feminist solidarity across borders, and in particular, Black women of the US and the Caribbean, and a focus on Cuban and US women. Nataka.
Thank you, Cindy. And can I just say to our speakers and our poets, Ashe, I mean, thank you, truly. I just want to start off by saying that. So with that being said, you know, we do have time maybe for a couple of questions. So we do have a question from Sonia, and her question, Yannette, it might be a little bit for Yannette. And so just trying to see, Yannette, are you still with us? Okay, I'm not for sure. So I may come back to that question when Yannette is able to join us. So a question I have, Sister Catherine, for you, and once again, thank you for your presentation. And something that I heard very clearly was that in your experience in Cuba, that they create and they birth systems. They don't just try to throw a Band-Aid on it. They know that they got it. If the system isn't working, you got to start over. And one of the things I also heard you say is that they move within solidarity. And I'm wondering, you know, with all, as a Black woman with the history of everything in this country, you know, I'm wondering how do we get out of the way of ourselves? So in your experience, how do we ready ourselves and get out of the way? Because we do believe we're the best and the brightest, and we have it figured out, although we know that we have disparities that are abysmal. Although we know that Black children and babies are dying and Black mothers are dying in our educational system, there's a lot of disparities, and we know there's healthcare disparities, and the list goes on, mental health, the list goes on, right? So how do we get out of our, how do we get out of our way? Or any suggestions? I mean, that's a big question, but any thoughts about that?
Yes, actually, I think that's one of the biggest, challenges we have. And I have a very good friend. In fact, the first friend I had, that was Dr. Norma Gilliard. And I have learned, and so Norma and I are about the same age. When she was in the literacy movement, I was in the poll tax voting movement in Arkansas, you know, and the difference is that the difference between the civil rights movement and the revolution is that when the civil rights movement, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, was that we were trying to get into a burning building. And in Cuba, there was a realization that the building's on fire. We need to build another building. And that's a mental switch.
Yes.
It's and so it takes like an opportunity to think about that and to talk about that and to discuss that and not be afraid to talk about that. You know, in a country that's democratic, we have a lot of taboos about what we're supposed to talk to, what we're supposed to say, and what we're not supposed to say. And I think that there's also so much stress involved with being a woman of color in the United States. You don't even understand it. And one of the things about the classes that I take to Cuba to do the 2-week immersion course is that by the second day, and especially by the third day, the women are saying, I could breathe. Just to be able to not feel that stress that you didn't even know you had until you could walk down the street. And people don't have to say hi to you, but there is something about being like you could breathe. And once you can breathe, you can think. So that's what I feel, that the first part is really being able to have space to be able to breathe and to think, and then to think what we want to do next.
That's powerful. Thank you for that. And I hear the, I love the metaphor that was given, because that is powerful of, you know, are we running into this burning building as opposed to running out and saying we need to create a whole new one? And what's the power of being still and feeling like you are a human being, and feeling as if you are able to just be and not walk down the street and constantly warding off different aggressions or obstacles or what may have you, where you don't have time to think. I appreciate that.
I just want to say one more thing, because I've done a lot of research on why babies have a better chance of surviving in Cuba than the United States. And the bottom line does have to do with stress. Stress is the most important variable in terms of having a healthy birth outcome. But I'm also a midwife. And so when a woman tells me I'm in labor, I say, have you cleaned your house? And if she hasn't cleaned her house and gone through a nesting process, she's not in labor. But the nesting process is feeling safe enough that all of those hormones like do what they're supposed to do so you can have this baby. And what I know is that women in Cuba may have work to do because it's not over, but you feel that it's home. One of the things that women tell me is that you can't use the US template of racism in Cuba, because here we may all be fighting about in our parents' house. Y'all don't feel like you have a house. And on one level, that's funny. And on another level, that's not funny. It's a sense of being like you have a place called home and your baby is safe to be born. Then you can release that hormone where you can safely go into labor.
That is powerful. Do you feel like you have a home and that your baby, you can have your baby and feel like your baby will be safe? Yeah, and I think that's something that we can all just sort of think about, that question and the impact that plays on the mother, right? In going and getting ready for birth.
And daddies want to build a home. They want to come with something. They want to step up with something. And yes, so that is really the gift for me of understanding that one little thing, the importance of home and of making home.
Yes, of home and belonging.
And belonging.
And belonging.
Regardless of what that home is.
Exactly.
It's not about money. It's a human resource again.
Absolutely. Belonging. Thank you so much for that. I see that, Yanette, hi. Okay, we have a question for you from Sonia. Okay, so let's see. So here we go. I'm very thankful. So she's very thankful for the ambassador for sharing how gender equality is embedded in Cuban institutions. She says she has a question pertaining to something that is very current in Cuba right now. She says what she knows because of her family ties in the country. So Sonia is wondering if you or the ambassador, or I guess you, Yanette, could comment on the choice of the Cuban government to establish stores that deal in foreign currency, only which are currently the only stores that have food in Cuba, and what is otherwise currently one of the worst food shortages in Cuba since the special period, and how that choice may affect Cuban women, as often they are the primary providers of food and care in the families.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good afternoon, everyone, again. Very nice to see you all, and thank you all for the presentations. I'm happy to answer the question, of course. Sonia is the person that is asking. In fact, this we have been talking about this this afternoon. It has to do with the blockade. Unfortunately, I had to say this. It not only affects, the Cuban women, that is our main topic today, but it's affecting the whole Cuban population. Unfortunately, because of this situation we have been facing, during the pandemic, and in the current situation that our government is carrying down an updating of our economic model, it has been very, very difficult, and it has been the main obstacle of the blockade to put every source of revenue for Cuban government to get and to purchase products and commodities to selling of the Cuban people. That's why our government had to take difficult decisions like this in the pandemic in order to, get hard currency to purchase things and goods and to supply, for the rest of the stores in Cuba. Those that are selling in hard currency, of course, are not the most of the stores in Cuba, but it's an important, measure that had to take during the current situation of the pandemic, the enforcement of the blockade situation, in order to get products to supply to the Cuban people for the other stores. Being a difficult situation, we have been familiar with that. We are struggling still with this. We are very appreciative of your struggle and fight against this kind of measures against Cuba, but it's like that.
Wow, thank you so much, Sister Yanette, for that response. And thank you for highlighting once again that, due to this blockade, we're talking about food security, and everyone has the right to food security. And we see the impact of the blockade on Cuban people. Thank you for answering that question. I know that we're a little bit over. I'm hoping maybe, because we're having some questions come in, I'm hoping that maybe we can ask maybe one more question, because I know that we have to close it out, and we appreciate everyone for staying on. So one of the questions that we have, it looks like, from Ken is, Sister Catherine and Lynette, maybe from both of your experiences and how you may want to answer this, but how is Cuba dealing with machismo and women of color?
Myself, or do you want me to ask that?
It's open for both of you to answer it, yes.
Well, as Ambassador Torres was highlighting, several of the achievements that has been, made in Cuba on this fight for the gender equality. There are still at the level of the society some type of, stereotypes, probably some type of subjectivity. People that are, believing that because they are men, they are more right, of the women. But there have been in Cuba several efforts in order to, create a consciousness that both are equal. I can tell you, for example, in the universities, there have been built for years what we call women's conference lecture. It's like a hall, we say in Cuba cathedral, to tackle about the Cuban efforts in this fight and the rights of the Cuban women. Also, along the system of education in Cuba are including some lectures, some researchers about the equal gender in Cuba, so that the child, since early on, can understand and can create conscience on how women and men have the same rights. There have been several efforts carried out also by the Cuban Federation of Women. There has been made along many years community-based work in order to create this conscience as well. Has been several prevention campaigns. Also, Cuba has joined international efforts in order to advertise, posts and several campaigns in order to deal with this and to create this consciousness. Even though the Cuban government has a clear, political will to solve this situation in Cuba, of course, there are some subjectivities, some stereotypes, and has been dealing with this as well. In the case of discrimination, has been many efforts as well. One of the most recent ones was in 2019 that was created a whole commission at the level of the higher levels of the government to tackle this situation, to talk to the people, to create conscience on this situation, but also in both cases, discrimination and also the equal gender, these do not end in conversation. This ends in public policies that has been carried out in both directions.
Wow, thank you so much for that, Yannette, in describing the systemic way in which different organizations, FMC particularly, have been working to raise the consciousness around gender equity. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Sister Catherine?
I've been thinking that how Cuba has like the Federation of Cuban Women, and almost every woman in Cuba belongs to the Federation of Cuban Women from the time you're 14 years old. We don't have a Federation of American Women, or US women. So there is not an institution or a coming together or any place where women can talk and figure out and reason and have a unified approach to what they would like to see happen. So that is one thing that I think is very powerful that they're modeling. And the other thing is that over the 20 years I've been there, when Cuba opens up a building that says, this is what we're doing, and that means it's real. And so there is that new center for gender equity or whatever it is, where there is a building that identifies that we are working on this. So that's what I would say as the person who doesn't live there, but has seen something that they're doing that we are not doing, that we can take advantage of.
Wow, thank you for that. And, imagine that there was a federation of, American women or women from the United States. And what would that mean? Imagine that. Thank you so much for our speakers and taking time to answer some of the questions. I wish we had more time for some of the questions. With that being said, I want to pass it back over to Cindy.
Thank you, Nataka, and thank you, Catherine and Yannette, for answering the questions. I know we always run short in terms of Q&A, and there's some really great questions in the box. So maybe we can have another webinar. There's lots to talk about in terms of issues in Cuba and women here in the United States and how to organize to lift the blockade. So I want to just, before we close, what can we do as a movement here in the United States? And so I just briefly want to say the US Women and Cuba collaboration along will be working on a campaign focused on changing US foreign policy, more notably to change it to a US feminist foreign policy. And that's a campaign that is being launched by the National Organization of Women, in particular, the NOW Global Feminist National Committee, that Jan Strout is a co-chair of, and Kolika, who are both on this webinar and have been participating in the US Women and Cuba collaboration in the organizing of this webinar, as well as Code Pink. And, in the next week, as part of the CSW, a feminist foreign policy is being widely talked about all around the world. And we in the United States are just catching up in terms of what would that look like and how do we as a movement here, a women's movement here, a peace movement here, work towards that feminist foreign policy. So I think Jan Stroud had posted some information there. She might repost it again about how you can get involved, or you can contact US Women in Cuba collaboration. So I am looking for the slide about the Wyden bill. So if we could post that. And while I'm waiting for that, I want to thank Allison Bodine and John Waller for running the tech stuff. It often gets very complicated, and they've done a great job today. So we want for everyone, recently Bobby Rush, Congressman Bobby Rush from Chicago, submitted a letter signed by, I think, about 80 Congress people to Biden for the Biden administration to take action on Cuba policy. And there is an important Senate bill sponsored by Senators Wyden, Leahy from Vermont, Wyden from Oregon, and Durbin from Illinois, and Merkley from Oregon. And it's called the US-Cuba Trade Act of 2021, Senate Bill 249. And this is an excellent bill, contains provisions to end the blockade entirely, not piece by piece, but entirely. So we would like you to contact your senators and urge them to co-sponsor and support this bill. This is our opportunity to lift the blockade, and we can do it this year. And there is a new coalition also, a new organization called ACERE, Alliance for Cuban Engagement and Respect, ACERE.org, that we hope that you will contact and get involved actively in support for this Senate bill. Second of all, part of the work that we've been doing all this last year, as I mentioned, was conducting webinars to educate people about Cuba. So the future webinars, there's one coming on April 11th, Sunday, in commemoration of the murder of George Floyd. And the title of the webinar, Why There Are No George Floyds in Cuba, organized by the Minnesota Cuba Committee to coincide with the trial of police officer Derek Chauvin. And this is being co-sponsored also by the US-Cuba Normalization Committee. And Wednesday, April 21st, and we talked about, Catherine Murphy was on our video about the 12 policies that have to be looked at in terms of literacy for women. So April 21st, a webinar on the 60th anniversary commemorations of the Cuban literacy campaign, as well as the defeat of the US organized mercenary invasion at Playa Girón, or the Bay of Pigs. And that is being organized by the US-Cuba Normalization Coalition. And Thursday, April 22nd, at noon Pacific time, Confronting COVID-19, Cuba's Approach to Healthcare for All, featuring doctors Helen Yaffe and Valia Rodriguez, producers of the film Cuba and the COVID-19, organized by the Bay Area Saving Lives campaign. So we hope you'll join us for one or all of those webinars. And as you can see, they span very interesting topics and topics important for our organizing in this country. The third area is the monthly virtual pickets. you know, Vancouver is great, and the Cuban network is great for their consistency of monthly events. And this is their monthly picket, virtual picket that happens on the 17th of every month. And this one is on Wednesday, March 17th, Lift the US Blockade on Cuba, sponsored by the Canadian Network on Cuba. And it is Wednesday, March 17th, 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 Eastern time. And there is the Zoom link, and we'll probably send that out also if you are in attendance here today, so that you can join them for the picket. And Aaron has, I think, put where the New York picket, they do theirs in person as well. The next one is the monthly car caravans that have really taken hold all across the country. And it initiated by Cuban Americans in Miami and is now taking place in numerous cities in the United States, Canada, and Quebec. And it is held on the last Sunday of every month against the blockade and to build bridges of love with Cuba. And that's why it was initiated by Cuban Americans, because they want to build the bridge of love with their families. And you can look on the National Network on Cuba, Facebook, as well as their website for details of cities, time, and place. And they will be posted, but it takes place on the last Sunday of each month. And then lastly, for further information, this is the websites and where you can find more information on all of the organizations, the sponsoring organizations, US Women in Cuba Collaboration, WILF, the Normalization Saving Lives Campaign, and the lead national organizations in the campaign against the blockade. I want to also just thank the other co-sponsors, NOW's Global Feminism National Committee, Code Pink, LILO, A Legacy of Equality and Organizing, Galentine Valley, Friends of Cuba, Birthing Project USA, Cuba Amistad, International Committee for Peace, Justice, and Dignity, and the Canadian Network on Cuba. So thank you all for today. Thank you to all the speakers, and especially Yanette Pumariaga and the ambassador for joining us. And Isa, of course, love you, Isa, and I'll take you to Cuba one day. And Catherine, wonderful to see you. Aza, Caridad, thank you all for joining us today. And Nataka, my sister. So thank you. And we'll be doing a follow-up with the link for this webinar so that you can share it with other people. And please spread the word. We've covered a lot of important information here today. And love you all, and happy International Women's Day, and onward with the Global Women's Bill of Rights. Thank you all.
Bye, Cindy.
Love you.
Cindy, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you all.